Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're diving into A Court of Wings and Ruin for our second episode. This is the third installment of A Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas. Alliances are forming, battles are brewing, secrets are being revealed, and the fate of Prythian hangs in the balance. We'll be breaking down our favorite moments, character arcs, shocking twists, and all the emotional damage that Sarah J. Maas delivers along the way. So grab a snack, settle in, and let's return to Prythian one more time. Okay, in this episode, we are discussing chapters 8 through 13. In this set of chapters, we have one additional visit to the wall to check out the third hole. We have some fights, a little bit of mind control, and an escape to someplace nice and cold and someplace very colorful. So let's jump in. We ended the last chapter with the royals killing a couple of humans as they came through the wall, children of the blessed. After Feyre had told them they weren't allowed to do that, Lucien and Feyre decide that they aren't going to bury or burn the bodies, that they are going to send a different message to the prince and princess of Hybern. They do that by hunting down the bog and luring it back to the campsite, and they barely manage to get away before the bog attacks the prince and the princess. Tamlin, at this point, is yelling at both Lucien and Feyre. He's reprimanding them. Let's call a spade a spade. He is reprimanding them for their actions, their choices. And I love it because he's like, they're our allies. Why on earth would you do this? And Feyre's response is, they're monsters. They butchered 3 innocents. And Tamlin says, well, you should have left it alone for me to deal with, because Tamlin's all about letting him deal with it. He doesn't want help. Whatever. And he says, you shouldn't have retaliated like children. Then he turns to Lucien and says, I expected better from you. And Feyre's response is, but not me? You expected better from him, but not me? What the crap? And Tamlin's eyes are like, you have a personal connection to those people. He doesn't. And this is where Feyre snaps. She's like, oh no. This is the issue right here. She says, that's the sort of thinking that has allowed for a wall to be the only solution between our two people. And we talked about it through the second book. Feyre's choice of words in lumping herself either with humans or with Fae. And I think it's interesting because she's doing a really great job through this whole section of chapters where she's in the Spring Court of pretending like she is part of the Fae and part of the Spring Court. And she's learned to wield those words to her advantage, where she hasn't been able to do that in the past. So she says that sort of thinking has allowed a wall to be the only solution between our two peoples, the humans and the Fae. For the Fae to look at these sorts of murders and not care. The loss of any life on either side is a personal connection. Or is it only high Fae lives that matter to you? And she's saying this loud enough because she knows that the Fae outside of the study where they are can hear, and she wants them to hear. Because she didn't orchestrate what happened, but she's been orchestrating a lot of things to get us to this point. So she's using it to her advantage to drive her own goals. So Tamlin stops short and snarls at Lucien to get out, I'll deal with you later. Feyre stands up for him. She is the only person at this point who has stood up for Lucien. Not his family, not Tamlin. No one except Feyre has stood up for him. He doesn't even stand up for himself. So she says, don't talk to him like that. Tamlin then turns his anger on her and says, you have jeopardized this alliance with the stunt you two pulled. And she says, good. They can all burn in hell for all I care. And then Tamlin roars, you sent the bog after them. And she doesn't so much as blink. She says, I knew the sentries had heard, indeed, by the cough of one outside, a sound of muffled shock. Because, the bog is a truly scary being, and they managed to lure it back to the campsite and set it upon the prince and the princess. And she says, and I made sure those sentries could hear, as I said, they terrorized those humans, made them suffer. I figured the bog was one of the few creatures that could return the favor. And then she thinks back to when Lucien and her had managed to lure it back, that Brianna and Dagden had been enjoying their bloodletting, that they'd managed to get away, but only after what had sounded like a good bit of screaming and fighting, and their faces remained bloodless hours later. their eyes still brimming with hate whenever they deign to look at us, which I love. Good. Then Lucian tries to help the situation, which doesn't help the situation, and say, Tam, those humans were barely more than children. Feyre gave the royals an order to stand down. They ignored it. If we let Hybern walk all over us, we stand to lose more than their alliance. The bog reminded them that we aren't without our claws too. He doesn't even take his eyes off of Feyre and says to Lucian, get out. And there was enough violence in those words that neither she or Lucian objected. So he leaves the room. And she sends her power out to kind of gauge where he is as well as where the sentries are. And she can sense him sitting at the foot of the stairs listening, as well as the 6 sentries in the hall were listening, because she wants them to listen to what she's about to do, because she's about to egg Tamlin on to get him to react and continue to drive that wedge, not only between him and Lucian, but to drive a wedge between Tamlin and his sentries and his people. So she says to Tamlin, you don't get to speak to me like that. You promised you wouldn't act this way. And he says, you have no idea what's at risk. And her response is, don't talk down to me. Not after what I went through to get back here to you, to our people. Again, she uses those words to her advantage now. You think any of us are happy to be working with Hybern. You think I don't see it in their faces. The question of whether I am worth the dishonor of it. And then she drives the nail in even harder and says, you sold us out to get me back. You whored us to Hybern. Forgive me if I am now trying to regain some of what we lost. So she's making it sound like she is the one who's fighting for the Spring Court, where Tamlin has only fought for her and not his people. And she wants it to seem that way so that the sentries outside here as well. And then, of course, Tamlin has gotten to a point where he can't hold back his rage anymore because he's not good at hiding it anyway or controlling it. Claws slid free, a feral growl rippled out of him. And she continues on, they hunted down and butchered those humans for sport. You might be willing to get on your knees for Hybern, but I am certainly not. And that's when he can't take anymore. He explodes. And again, he explodes like he did in book 2. Furniture splintered, went flying, windows cracked and shattered. And this time I did not shield myself because she egged him on. She wanted him to get to this point. The work table slammed into me, throwing me against the bookshelf, and every place where flesh and bone met wood barked and ached. She falls to her knees on the carpeted floor. Tamlin is instantly there, hand shaking, wanting to know if she's okay. This time, though, Lucian is actually stepping in, or trying to step in so that things don't go too far like they did the last time. So he bursts through the doors and asks, what have you done? And he actually pushes Tamlin out of the way. And she even mentions he let Lucian shove him aside and help me stand. And at this point, she can feel a cut on her cheek and the blood that's leaking down it. They step out into the hall, and Braun and Hart, who are 2 of the sentries who have actually been named, and they are 2 of Tamlin's favorite Lord warriors. They were gaping, attention torn between the wrecked study and her face. Lucian takes her through the hall. She does catch her reflection in the mirror, does see kind of how bad. She has a large scratch on her cheek and then lots of little nicks peppering her arms and her neck. Tamlin does step out of the study after them, just says Feyre. He doesn't make it through anything else. She halts and just says, I'm fine, I'm sorry, I'm fine, and then keeps walking. And she says, no one, not even Tamlin, looked convinced. And she says, if I could have painted that moment, I would have named it A Portrait of Snares and Baiting, because that's exactly what she did. So she uses the power she got from the High Lord of Dawn, which is the healing power. She mentions she pushes that away so that it does not heal her wounds because she wants people to see them. She wants them to remember what Tamlin did to her. And she's the reason he's done all of this stuff. So if he can do that to her, what can he do to everybody else? Or what will he do to everyone else? Rhys, of course, felt something through the bond, so he wants to make sure that she's okay. She says, I'm fine. It's nothing I can't handle. And he says, I know better than to tell you to be careful or to come home, but I want you home soon. So he's being her mate, kind of being the High Lord and saying, I'm not going to tell you you need to come home, but you need to come home soon. I can't take you not being here or being at his mercy. And then I think it's funny because he says, I want him dead for putting his hands on you. And she snarks back, well, he didn't technically put his hands on me. His magic touched me. And his response is, I'm glad you have a sense of humor in regards to this because I certainly don't. So she sends a picture of herself sticking her tongue out at him, which I love because that's such a snarky, Feyre thing to do. And then he sends a picture back to her with his tongue, but it is not the same thing. It is something sexual. And then, of course, she is super thrilled to have that image in her head and to be excited to get to see him, hopefully soon. So the next day, she makes a point to actually go on a ride. She does it when Bronn and Hart, those two sentries, are on duty. So they go with her. As she's on her ride, she moves and then groans or grunts a little bit because of the pain so that they can really see that he hurt her. Tamlin, of course, begged for forgiveness at dinner after it happened and that she'd given it to him, but Lucien hadn't spoken to him at all. Jury and the Highburns are sulking again because what just happened has delayed them getting to the third hole in the wall. And she says that they had backed off a little bit after sending the bog after them, but she still kept her shields up around herself and the others. The strain, now a constant headache that had any extra sort of magic, feeling feeble and thin. So she is realizing She's not realizing that her power is dwindling just yet or that there's less of it to use, but it is now a constant headache to use it. And then Ianthe shows up. And we have round 2 with Ianthe. She arrived knowing the full details of what had transpired in the study. Of course she did, because Tamlin went straight to her to confess to her, Lotable, to get absolution from the mother or the cauldron or whoever else. And I think it's funny because Feyre's response is she invited Ianthe back to the house afterwards as a show of taking her counsel, telling the courtiers and others at our crowded table that night how lucky we were to have Tamlin and Ianthe guarding our lands. Honestly, I don't know how none of them connected it. How none of them saw my words as not a strange coincidence, but a dare, a threat, especially when 7 Naga broke into the estate grounds just past midnight. So we finally figure out where the keys that were lost to the gate of the mansion went. The Naga break in, they have the keys. They're not the ones who stole them, but they now show up with the keys. They're all killed before they even get to the house. Tamlin has come to tell her he's, of course, covered in blood because he helped kill them. But it is a warning vision that Ianthe receives that told them the attack was happening. So that it looks like all of them were saved from further harm by Ianthe. And she's kind of played it up with the Naga that this was the final show of power after Amarantha was gone because they had free reign while Amarantha ruled. So this scene is when Feyre takes the extra step to drive that wedge between Tamlin and his sentries. And we talked about it in the first book that Tamlin didn't think he was going to be a High Lord, so he became a sentry himself. He focused on learning how to fight, working with his sentries, and that they were not more prized to him than his courtiers or high fae friends, but that his sentries were like his group because he felt like he was a sentry, that was all he was good for when he didn't think he was going to become a High Lord. So that's what makes this even worse is because of the relationship that he initially had with his sentries. So at this point, they have the sentry who was on duty when the keys went missing. They also happen to be his keys that went missing. They have him strung up between 2 posts, stripped down to his pants. Tamlin is not really questioning him, but essentially saying, like, we trusted you to guard this estate and its people. You were found not only sleeping at the gate last night, but it was your set of keys that originally went missing. The sentry says, I never fall asleep. It's never happened until now. I must have just nodded off for a minute or two. And he says, you jeopardized the lives and everyone in it because you fell asleep. And it could not go unpunished because the Highburn royals were there and Tamlin's trying to put up a solid front in front of the royals. He has to keep that going. they can't show any sign of weakness. So Tamlin does reach for a whip to whip the sentry as his punishment. All the sentries, his most trusted warriors, shifted about, some outright glaring at Tamlin, some trying not to watch what was about to unfold. Feyre grabs Lucian's hand because while she's going to dig this wedge between Tamlin and his sentries, she's also further digging the wedge between Tamlin and Lucian. And then she unravels a memory in the sentry's mind that she had kept him from remembering, and he claims it is Ianthe who took the keys, that she's the one who put him to sleep and stole the keys to give them to the Naga. Tamlin isn't sure who to believe because he's believed his sentries in the past, but he also takes everything Ianthe says at face value. So she says, I had been waiting to see how she'd counter my showing of power at the solstice, tracking her movements that entire day and night. Within moments of my leaving the party, she'd gone to the barracks, used some glimmer of power to lure him to sleep and taken his keys, then planted her warnings about the Naga's impending attacks. Then she gave the keys to the creatures herself. And all of this so that she could be the one to sound the alarm and supposedly stop everyone from being hurt. So then she responds, Ianthe responds with, well, why should I take the keys? I warned you of the attacks. And he says, I saw you in the barracks. I saw you that night. And Feyre watches Tamlin as the sentry turns pleading eyes to him. It wasn't fear of pain that propelled him, but the lashings would have been deserved and earned and borne well. The fear was the honor lost. And Ianthe's face remains serene as she says, I would have thought one of your sentries would have more dignity than to spread lies to spare himself of some fleeting pain. So she doesn't know it, but she is unwittingly digging this divide in even more between Tamlin and his sentries. So at this point, Feyre steps up and says, I will hear the sentry's story. Ianthe, trying to undermine Feyre, says, well, with all due respect, my lady, it is not your judgment to make. And Feyre thinks, and there it was, the attempt to knock me down a few pegs. Feyre ignores her and still says, I will hear your story. Then Ianthe doesn't know when to stop talking, is what it comes down to. Says, you'll take the word of a sentry over that of a high priestess. She has unwittingly told everybody there that she values herself above all others, the high fae over the lesser fairies.
Priestess doth protest too much.
Right? Exactly. And Feyre thinks my disgust at her blurted words wasn't feigned. The guards shifted on their feet at the insult, the tone, even if they had not already trusted their fellow sentry. From her words alone, they realized the guilt, her guilt. Feyre looks at Tamlin then, saw his eyes sharpen as well with understanding because there were too many protests from Ianthe. He is well aware at this point that Ianthe had probably planned this entire thing, but he is not willing to go against her because it is a sign of weakness in front of the Highburn royals. Feyre tries to get him not to do anything about it, says perhaps it was a mistake, don't take it from his hide or his honor, let's hear him out. But Brianna snorts at that point, and that is the final nail in the coffin, because Tamlin immediately realizes this is making them look weak and vulnerable, ripe for conquest. She says, I saw the words slam through Tamlin's face as if they were shutting doors in their wake, and there was no other interpretation for Tamlin other than we are weak and vulnerable. Ianthe goes even further because she really doesn't know how to shut her mouth. And she says, there are laws that have to be obeyed, traditions. He broke our trust, has let our blood be spilled for his carelessness. Now he seeks to accuse a high priestess of his failings. It cannot go unpunished. And then she says, 21 lashes, High Lord. Like, she is demanding Tamlin do this, telling the High Lord that he needs to. Feyre is begging for him not to. And she says, in this way, my revenge edged towards something oily, something foreign and queasy. He would heal from the pain, but the blow to his honor, it'd take a little piece out of me as well. Because she is justified to herself that everything that she's doing is for retribution for herself. It's also for everything that's going to come for the war. And she's going to think about it in a couple of pages as well, what she could have done differently, how she could have handled it differently, and the couple of options that she was going through. But this is the option that she chose, was to bring the court down from the inside out. So Tamlin at this point realizes that Ianthe's ally, having her as an ally wasn't too important to risk. So he is going to side with her and do at least 21 lashes. So he tells Braun to put the bit into the sentry's mouth so that he can bite down on it as he is being whipped. There was a heartbeat of hesitation from Braun, as if the shock of Tamlin's order had rippled through him, through all the guards, siding with Ianthe over them, his sentries. And this is where Feyre remembers these sentries had been with Tamlin through everything that just happened with Amarantha. They went over the wall again and again, trying to break the curse for him. They had agreed to it. They'd done it willingly because they were willing to do that for Tamlin. They were willing to die and be hunted, just like Andris, who Feyre killed in the first book, had done it willingly, and that Tamlin had sent them over there again and again, and not all of them had come back, but they had gone willingly, and yet this was his thanks, his gratitude, his trust. So at this point, all the guards have realized that the High Priestess had orchestrated the entire attack to cast herself as a savior, offering up the reputation of one of their own as the asking price. They had no idea that Pharaoh had goaded her into it. Now they have realized that this is how that Tamlin will listen to her without question to a fault. And now the sentries are all sizing up Ianthe and the royals. The Tamlin had always been one of them, fought for them until now, until Hybern, until he put these foreign monsters before them and a scheming high priestess before them. And the thunderous crack of the whip cleaved the air, snapped through the barracks, the estate, through the very foundations of the court. So this is the moment when the court breaks apart. And Feyre says in the next chapter, Ianthe wasn't even done. She has decided that she and Tamlin will go with all of them to see the third and final hole in the wall. In the meantime, Feyre has been tending to the wounds of the sentry. She's helped him get to the barracks after the whipping, brought water, and actually helped tend to the wounds along with the healer. And then she thanked Braun and Hart by name on her way out as a way to further put herself apart from Tamlin and Ianthe. Feyre then goes to her room so that she can pack to leave for the third wall. And she has been bringing a separate bag for each time she leaves. That way, if she has to go and actually go back to the night court, she has all the things that she needs. Alice brings her an additional pack and says, when you leave tomorrow, we leave as well. My nephews and I are packed. Our ponies are ready to go back to the Springcourt territory at last. And she uses the excuse that it's been too long since she's seen her home. But we know that she is only leaving because she knows Feyre is going to be leaving after tomorrow because she has officially sundered the Springcourt apart. And Alice is leaving to save herself and her boys. So she says she's been too long since she has saw her home. Feyre's response is, I know the feeling. Alice says, I wish you well, lady, for the rest of your days, however long they may be. I wish you well. And I love this part because Feyre gives her a little bit of trust and tells her more than she's told anybody else in the Springcourt. And she says, don't ever tell Tarquin that you know me well. And Alice, she doesn't say anything, but she raises her brows as if, why? Why are you telling me this? And Feyre says, there is a blood ruby with my name on it. And Alice kind of blanches because she knows the significance of a blood ruby from the Summer Court. But Alice's response is still, blood rubies or not, you will always have one friend in the Summer Court. And Feyre's response is, you will always have one in mine. She knew which court I meant and did not look afraid. Which I love that Alice has officially switched, maybe not switched sides, but realized that Rhysand and the Night Court are not the evil that they're portrayed. So the sentries don't so much as glance or speak to Tamlin, which I love, that they are completely shutting him out now because they're pissed off. So they are winnowing to the third hole as well. And again, it is winnow walk to get there. But Feyre describes winnowing that it felt like wading through mud. My powers had become more of a burden than a help, and I had a throbbing headache by noon and spent the last leg of our journey dizzy and disoriented. But she hasn't put two and two together as far as what's happening with her powers or what's going on with the headaches. So she kind of quietly, shyly asks to share a tent with Ianthe. One, because she doesn't want to share a tent with Tamlin and give him any ideas. But two, it is because she does not want Lucian to have to share a tent with Ianthe. Because again, She is protecting Lucian where no one else ever has. Feyre does mention that lying beside Ianthe without slitting her throat was an exercise in patience and control, which I totally understand, because at this point she just wants to slam her head into the nearest rock. But she says that repeating the names of those she loved in the darkness is what got her through it. She does, as she wakes up, she kind of pulls her knife out because she doesn't trust Ianthe. So she's had the dagger underneath her pillow the whole time, has been holding it as she slept through the night. So she sits up and is kind of staring at the dagger, looking back and forth between it and Ianthe. And that's when Ianthe wakes up. And it just cracks me up that that's the first thing Ianthe sees. And she is a little afraid, which she should be. Good. But she is definitely a little afraid to see Feyre holding a knife over her. And Feyre thinks I wasn't sure I'd been born with the ability to forgive, not for the terrors inflicted on those I loved. For myself, yes, I didn't care enough about myself. But for others, nope. And she then says to Ianthe, you can't be too careful while sharing a camp with enemies. And she does not necessarily mean Hybern. But Ianthe responds with, Hybern is not our enemy. And Feyre thinks, from her paleness as I left the tent, I knew my answering smile had done its job well. So again, this is a little bit of the wolf smile that she's letting out. Feyre is kind of hanging out with the royals as they observe the third hole, which isn't really something she's done before. But Ianthe is off doing something. Ianthe is praying by the stream. Jurian and Tamlin had gone off hunting to get them some fresh food, and Lucian has gone off. Feyre doesn't know where he is. So Feyre is sitting on a small boulder, eating an apple as she's watching the prince and the princess. And they're kind of talking back and forth that the first hole was better, closer to the western coast. Then they kind of argue back and forth. This one's closer to the continent and to the strait, but we'd have better access, more access to the High Lord supplies if we use this one. And Feyre tries to kind of put her 2 cents in because she knows she's probably going to have to leave at some point during this outing, but there's still bits of information that she needs to gather. So she starts asking questions to try and garner those answers. So she says, unless you want to risk the other courts having time to rally and intercepting you before you can cross the strait, I'd pick this one. And then she says, but what do I know? You have been squatting on an island for 500 years. Clearly, you know more about Prythian than I do. And Branna hisses and says, this is not about armies, so I will trust you to keep your mouth shut until we have use for you. And Ferris says, so you mean to tell me all of this nonsense hasn't been to find a place to break through the wall and use the cauldron to also transport the mass of your armies here? And this is where Branna brags a little bit because Feyre has kind of goaded her into doing it. And she says, the cauldron is not for transporting grunt armies, it is for remaking world. It is for bringing down this hideous wall and reclaiming what we were. Feyre then says, I think with an army of 10,000, you wouldn't need any magical objects to do your dirty work. So again, she's goading Branna into answering more questions, which Branna does. She then says, our army is 10 times that, and twice that number if you count our allies in Balahan, Montessori, and Rask. So Feyre was like, okay, so 200,000 troops, this is what she's thinking, and these are all of their allies on the continent. Then she goes so far as to say, well, why didn't you strike when Amarantha held Prythian? And they said the king had not yet found the cauldron despite years of searching. It served his purposes to let her be an experiment for how we might break these people, the people of Prythian, and served as good motivation for our allies on the continent to join us, knowing what would await them if they didn't. So Feyre asks, so they're going to converge here and I'm supposed to play hostess to so many soldiers. And Branna divulges a little more information and says, no, our own forces will take care of Prythian before uniting with the others. Our commanders are preparing as we speak. And she goes so far as to say, you must think you stand a shot of losing if you're bothering to use the cauldron to help you win. And Branna says the cauldron is victory. It will wipe this world clean again. And Feyre asks, so you need this exact spot to unleash it. Dagnan then jumps in and says this exact spot exists because a person or object of mighty power passed through it. The cauldron will study the work they've already done and magnify it until the wall collapses entirely. It is careful, complex process that I doubt your mortal mind will be able to grasp. So at this point, she now has all of the information that she needs. She has the numbers, the purpose, specific location, and the names of foreign territories that were their allies. So now she is ready to leave. She is booking it back to her home. She says, and more than that, I had a people who had lost faith in their high priestess. I had sentries who were beginning to rebel against their high lord. And as a result of those things, I had highborn royals doubting the strength of their allies here. I'd primed this court to fall, not from outside forces, but its own internal warring. She already has a plan to cover up how and why she leaves, that the party would return without her and maintain the illusion of strength. Ianthe and Tamlin would lie where and why she'd gone. And so she is kind of stringing together a memory into one of the sentries' minds to reveal a couple days after they get back, to say that she had fled for her life after being nearly killed by the highborn prince and princess, and she'd planted images in his head of her brutalized body using the markings that were consistent with what the prince and princess had already done as far as their fighting style, that she had run for her life when Tamlin and Ianthe refused to intervene because they didn't want to risk their alliance with Hybern. So that is her plan. She gets her pack. She does steal the Illyrian knives that Tamlin has, takes them with her, and is starting to head home. She makes it into the woods, and then she hears Lucian and Ianthe. And Lucian is telling Ianthe to back off, that he was obliged to perform the rite that night, that it wasn't a product of desire. Her response is, you and I had fun, let's have fun again. He says, I'm a mated male. And she says, yeah, well, you don't really act like that with Feyre. Through this whole conversation between the two of them, Feyre is not close enough that they know she's there, but she's close enough that she can hear, and she's debating back and forth whether she keeps going so that she can make it back with minimal interaction or without anyone knowing, or should she come and help Lucian. And she does think I had long since stopped feeling any sort of guilt or doubt about my plan, not with Alice now safely away. So Alice was really the only one that she wanted to get out of the Spring Court because she was the only one who actually helped her back when she was there the first time around. But her relationship with Lucian is kind of a back and forth, that he has helped her in some regard, but not a whole lot. So she does decide that she is going to go help him. And the reason she decides that is because he responds to Ianthe by saying, do not touch me. And this kind of flips a switch for her because this is very similar to things that she and Rhysand have both had to deal with personally. And she is not interested in letting Ianthe take advantage of somebody else. So she comes into the clearing. Lucian is backed against a tree. He has blue shackles, the ones that actually nullify their powers, just like the ones that Rhysand had in book 2. Feyre comes into the clearing and tries to tell her that's enough. Ianthe is just like, go away. This doesn't pertain to you. We're in the middle of a game. We'll come back to camp when we're done. And then Feyre strikes. She goes into Ianthe's mind and takes it over. And I think it's interesting that she says it was a mask over a face of decay. That's what it was like to go into her mind. And she is able to see that she's previously used her power and had outright forced men to her bed, convinced she was entitled to them. And Feyre is done letting her do this. She is not going to let her do it again. So she takes over her mind and says, take your hands off of him, unshackle him. Then she tells Ianthe to pick up a rock and start smacking her hand, crushing it with the rock until she's told otherwise. At this point, Lucian's skin is draining of color as he watches Ianthe obey every command because he is realizing that Feyre is a Damati. It is the same hand that she had put on Lucian, and she was about to try and unbutton his shirt. She goes so far as to tell Ianthe never to touch another person again against their will. Never convince yourself that they're just playing games. Only if they approach you are you allowed to have a relationship or take them to bed. You will not remember what happened here. You will tell the others that you fell. You're allowed to see a healer to set the bones, but not to erase the scarring because she wants Ianthe to look at the scars and to remember and to fear, but not remember what she's fearing. But that she wants Ianthe to live the rest of her life feeling like there is someone chasing her or haunting her steps. She wants her to be afraid for the rest of her life. That she debated slitting her throat that morning and every night since, from the day that she learned she had sold her sisters to Hybern. And she says, but I think this is a better punishment, and I hope you live a long life and never know a moment's peace. At that point, Ianthe is just kind of kneeling on the ground. Her hand is bleeding. And Feyre tells her, not to rise or go anywhere until somebody finds her. Lucian's wide eyes are looking between Ianthe and Feyre, and then you hear Brianna say the word you're looking for, Lucian, is Damati. And that's when Brianna and Dagnan step into the clearing because they have figured out Feyre's ruse. Feyre realizes that Brianna and Dagnan are talking to try and buy them time. She thinks they're buying time until Tamlin returns. Really, they're buying time because all of the food and the water that Feyre and Lucian and Tamlin have been drinking has been laced with Fabane, which is the stone that Hybern uses to nullify your powers. So because they're ingesting it, it is slowly nullifying their powers, and that is why Feyre is struggling to use her powers, why it's causing such a bad headache. Lucian realizes what's happening. He shoves off the tree, but he doesn't come to her side because he realizes that she is about to leave and that everything she has done was to bring the spring court to its knees so that she could go back to her home in the night court. And there is a flicker of agony on his face because of her. He is realizing that it's not quite a betrayal, but that's what it is in his eyes. And that's when Brianna actually lets Feyre know that they see all of the plotting that she's been doing, such skilled maneuvering, but you were going through that not worrying that we would be doing the same. And that's when Lucian realizes that neither one of them are going to make it out of this clearing alive or with their brains intact because Brianna and Dagdan are divulging some secrets that they wouldn't be divulging if they didn't know for a fact that they wouldn't be leaving the clearing or with their minds intact or at all. Feyre says to take the spring court's going to fall one way or another. Brianna says, oh, we intend to, but then there's the matter of you. We can't let you go because our king would be very upset by that. And that's when she goes into detail as far as how they got the powder into them, that it was actually Ianthe who has been putting it into her food, as well as Lucian's, that they didn't even need to use their powers to control her mind for her to do it. She just agreed to it. But she does say she did a valiant effort of protecting all of those minds, even though the princess and the prince didn't actually have to use their powers. And that the apple she had eaten about an hour ago had been grown in the king's own orchard, and it had been watered with water laced with Fabane. And they're giving her about another 5 to 10 minutes before her power is completely snuffed out by the apple. So at that point, she realizes that she has to fight and she has to do it now, otherwise she's not getting out. And that she wasn't fighting Hybern cronies unaware in the woods. She was not fighting the Adder and the Ilk in the streets of Valeris, that she was actually going to be fighting commanders of the king's army. But she is crafty and she uses their connection against them. So she does end up winnowing to Dagdan, does stab him, but he manages to evade it so that it doesn't do too much damage. And then the two of them kind of winnow with each other, fighting, attempting to hurt each other. They were a whirlwind of steel and shadow through the clearing, and months of Cassian's brutal training clicked into place as I kept my feet under me. I love how she references everything that Cassian taught her and that she's actually able to use it in this instant and is happy that those instincts are now coming alive because of how much he drilled it into her.
She doesn't mention it, but I also was thinking about Rhysand and how much he picked at her and baited her early on to keep her calm and control her own rage, because she's ticked at this point.
Yes.
She is beyond ticked because of Ianthe already, and then them coming into the clearing and all they did, and then her split of emotions trying to decide help Lucian or leave, fight or flight, that kind of thing, that you have to think back to everything Rhys did to her that pissed her off in the first few books. Because it wouldn't have gotten her where she was at without Cassian. Straight.
Yep. So the combination of what they did between the two of them has helped her combine that and help her overcome multiple different scenarios that she'd been put in, like this one. And I love that she said there was a vague sense of Lucian gaping. Even Brianna was taken aback by my show of skill against her brother. And so that's when she realized that Dagdan is kind of pulling punches because he's buying time for her powers to actually run out and essentially render her mortal. So she says, I had to hit him where he was weakest. So she throws some flame up at Branna because they weren't expecting that. They were expecting her to either fight with sword or with her mind. Whereas we know Feyre has so many different powers in her arsenal that she can use. So she ends up burning Branna, and Dagden loses his focus for a heartbeat, and that's when she is able to stab him deep in his abdomen. And he then is, of course, super frustrated, lunges at her, not pulling punches this time around because he's upset that his twin has been hurt. And then Branna surges to her feet to try and also attack Feyre, but Lucien is there because he's also realized that he needs to fight or he might not make it out of this clearing alive. Lucien manages to cut off Branna's head. A tremor shuddered through the clearing like some thread between the twins had been snipped as Branna's dark head thudded onto the grass. The Lucien kills Branna. Dagden screams, launches himself at Lucien. Lucien doesn't turn fast enough to actually block the blow, but Feyre does. She manages to winnow right in front or right beside to parry Dagden's sword and then also stab him as well, right through the eye, which I love. She stabs a dagger right through the eye into the back of his skull. So now both Branna and Dagden are dead in this little clearing. Ianthe is still just chilling on the ground. That's what she was told to do, so she hasn't moved. Lucien then he says, you're going back to the Night Court. Feyre's only response is yes, and he says, I'm going with you, to which she responds, no. She's on a one-word answer kick right now. And Lucien then says, you're not going to make it without magic. You need me. I'm going with you. I'm going to get my mate. And Feyre thinks there was a time for argument, for truth and debate, for answers that he desperately wanted, but it wasn't now because they had to get far enough away that Tamlin and the others wouldn't be able to find them. Because at this point, there's been enough shouting that she assumes Tamlin has heard it. And she says, okay, but don't make me regret this. So they do end up heading through the woods. They're heading towards the doors or the caves that lead from this court to other courts. Also where the path from this court to under the mountain was that they ended up caving in. Lucien realizes this and they kind of debate back and forth because their options are the autumn court or the summer court because there are no caves to other courts and under the mountain has now been closed. Feyre says, I can't go to the summer court. They'll kill me on sight. And Lucien says, then we go to the autumn court until they can get their powers back. She says, I just need someplace to hide until I can winnow again. He says, I know just the place where we can go. So they go up to the cave that leads them to the autumn court. And Lucien looks at her because there are supposed to be guards there guarding all of the caves. And he looks at her asking, did you do this as well? And she just nods yes, that she did something or got the guards to go away in anticipation of her needing to most likely use one of these caves. That Cassian had taught me to always have a second escape route. Always. So they go up to the mouth of the cave and she tells them, stay if you want. What's done is done. Hybern is coming. It's already here. And she's thinking, I debated it for weeks whether it was better to claim the spring court for ourselves or to let it fall. And she kind of goes back and forth. This is where I talked about it earlier. She's trying to figure out what the best option was because the spring court can no longer remain neutral, no longer be a barrier between the forces in the north and the humans in the south, that they either needed to take it over and hold it or they needed to let it fall. And she thinks she could have easily called down Cassian and Rhysand and had an Illyrian band come down and take over the spring court. But then one, they'd have to hold that territory with 5 other courts in between them and the Night Court, which would have been really difficult. On top of that, taking the spring court may have garnered sympathy from the other courts in regards to Tamlin and his spring court being taken over by the Night Court, and it could have caused those other courts to side with Hybern instead. So she didn't want that to be an option, so she decided to let it fall, presumably to Hybern, also thinking that that might garner those other courts to have sympathy for the spring court against Hybern and then join against Hybern, hopefully with the Night Court. And Lucien, before they go in, Lucien says, you were right. The girl I knew did die under the mountain. And she says, she thinks, I wasn't sure if it was an insult or not. And she says, at least we agree on that. And she thinks as they enter the cave in the distance, I thought I might have imagined a beast's roar cleave the land. So Tamlin roaring because he's realized something. Who knows what it is? Maybe he believes whatever story Feyre put into Ianthe's mind, that it was the Fey Royals that tried to kill Feyre. Feyre was fleeing with her life. Maybe that's what he believes. Maybe he finally sees what she's been doing the whole time. Who knows? We won't know until later on. But I think it's interesting because we didn't talk about Jurian and our thoughts towards him, but we did mention that he sees what she's doing and isn't getting in her way or trying to stop her, which I liked. But again, I feel like it's only because he has his own priorities. And if it interfered with his priorities, then he would intervene. But because it doesn't, he doesn't care. He's going to let it happen no matter what. And I think Lucian has been monitoring her and seeing a lot of what she's doing, and he's realized it. And whether he's realized it and chose not to say anything because Feyre is his only link to Elaine and getting her back, or if he's realized that she deserves retribution against them for what they did to her. I don't know, but I feel like Lucian's finally making a right decision. Or maybe he sees that Feyre is the only one who's actually stood up for him and actually protected him.
I think it's partly that and partly his disgust with Tamlin. I think through it, you've started to see a little bit of his frustration with Tamlin, kind of stepping in. I mean, even if he did realize, and we don't know for sure if he did or not, what Feyre did with the nightmare scene, he doesn't see it as anything but innocent. I'm just trying to help her. I'm
Right. I'm
trying to
trying
make
to
up
do what
for
I
time
didn't
lost.
do before. Yep.
Whether exactly, whether I'm acting out of guilt or compassion because I as a fae, because I'm seeing, hey, she is different, but she's stronger. She's trying to protect herself in some ways. I kind of feel like he's shifting how he was seeing her because his allegiance toward Tamlin may have changed a bit because he realized what he. That's where my mindset kind of went with that. And with Jurian, I kind of feel like part of why he stepped back, like you said, it's not going to interfere with his plans. But I also think with how he saw Feyre react to the children of the blessed and the fact that she showed that compassion, showing she did still have a side that was truly looking at both people, that I think in that sense, he kind of saw, okay, you can see the mortal struggle too. I'm going to
Right.
let you be. So I kind of wonder if
That
part of it is that he admires that a bit.
I think that, but I also think like we're going to learn later on in this book that Jurian is also putting on an act. He's doing a really good job of putting on an act. So I think this is like we talk about him not jumping in or not hindering her plans because it doesn't pertain to him, so he doesn't care. But I also think it's because he secretly wants Hybern to lose because he knows what Hybern is going to do to humans. And in the end, he is still a human. He still wants to fight for the humans just like he did 500 years ago in the war. So I think that's also what it is he's playing his own game to get what he wants. And what he wants is to remain close enough to the king to be able to get the information he needs and then feed it to the humans or feed it to whatever allies the humans end up having. So I do think he's kind of playing both sides as well. I think that leads into it. And I think with Lucian too, we haven't gotten to it, but eventually he's going to come to an understanding once they get to the night court and he sees the relationship that she has and the relationship that the inner circle has with each other. And there's one point where he says, this is what I thought Tamlin's court was going to be. So I think he's starting to see that or kind of think if Feyre has turned away from Tamlin and she is actually healed, like I think he's seen how much she is healed while being with Rhysand and the Night Court. He may not be putting all of the pieces together because I think there's still some underlying hate between Lucian and Rhysand because of everything that Rhysand has done or did to Tamlin. So I think his loyalty to Tamlin still has him not liking Rhysand. But I think he's starting to see maybe some of what Rhysand does is an act or a front to hide other things. So I think he's starting to see that a little bit as well. Okay, so the next couple of chapters are Feyre and Lucian traveling through a couple of different courts to get back to the Night Court, or at least to get to a point where both of them have magic again, or enough magic for Feyre to either contact Rhys or to be able to winnow more. At this point, both of them have zero magic, absolutely zero magic. I think it's interesting that Feyre points out that she feels utterly helpless now that she doesn't have any magic because she's become so reliant on it that even though that's how she was before, She is kind of yelling at herself in the back of her head because she has become so reliant on her magic to survive. And now she's to the point where I don't know how I survived without magic. I don't know how that happened. Apparently, it was a lot of luck that got her through the first 19 years of her human life. She assumes that at this point, Reese has probably realized that their bond has gone dark. But because he doesn't know where she is, he isn't able to come rescue her. We do find out in a couple of chapters that he does come to the spring court, but she and Lucian are already gone. So she and Lucian go through the cave to the autumn court. At this point, they aren't talking pretty much only because stealth is the only way they're going to stay alive. She can tell that Lucian is like brimming with questions. He wants to know what the heck is going on, because now she has completely betrayed the spring court, primed them to fall, and is leaving to go back to, presumably, the night court. And so he has all kinds of questions. And she can feel his gaze on her every once in a while, but because they have to be quiet to make it through the cave and into the autumn court and through the autumn court, that's pretty much the only reason that he isn't asking questions. They do come into the autumn court. Feyre mentions, she doesn't mention at that point. Lucian takes her immediately pretty much to another cave, and this cave doesn't lead anywhere. It's just a makeshift camp that presumably Lucian used when he still lived in the Autumn Court. So that's where they stay for the first night. It does have some, like a candle on kind of a makeshift ledge and other very old, very dusty bedrolls and cloaks and that kind of thing. So you can tell it's been at least multiple months, if not a couple of years, since somebody actually used this cave. But they do talk a little bit in this initial cave. Lucian's biggest question that he wants to know is this, you've planned this all along? And her response is yes. And he says, well, that's all you have to say? Really? You did all of this and your only response is going to be yes. And she says, she doesn't even respond to that. At this point, she's going through her pack, trying to figure out what food she can eat and what food she can't eat. Is there even anything in her pack that she can eat, or is everything been laced with the Faebane from the Hybern royals? Lucian continues talking because he wants more answers. He says, I knew you were lying the moment you unleashed that light in Hybern. My friend at Dawn Court has the same power. Her light is identical. He says, so I know it doesn't do whatever crap you said it did in Hybern. And her response is, well, then why didn't you tell him? Why didn't you tell Tamlin that you knew I was lying about everything? And she says, you were his faithful dog in every other regard, so why not in this? And Lucian's response is, well, I'm glad to see that you've taken off the mask, at least. And she does. She makes sure that her face completely shows the coldness that she feels towards the spring court and everything that's happened to her because of them. And Lucian says, I didn't tell him for two reasons, which we talked about a little bit earlier. One, it felt like kicking a male already down. I couldn't take that hope away from him. To which Feyre rolls her eyes because, yeah, seriously, what kind of hope does he need? He has done diddly squat in his life and still gets praise for it. And he says, and two, I knew if I was correct and called you on it, you'd find a way to make sure I never saw Elaine again. So he says, I didn't say it because one, I didn't want to hurt Tamlin's little baby feelings, and two, because I didn't want you to try and take Elaine from me, which are both self-serving reasons, because he didn't not tell Tamlin to save Tamlin's feelings. He did it because he didn't want to have to deal with Tamlin and his feelings. At least that's my interpretation. And that's kind of what Feyre says. And that's why you're here. Not because it's right and he's always been wrong, but just so you can get what you think you're owed, as in Elaine being his mate. Lucian's response is, she is my mate and she's in enemy hands. Feyre cuts him off and says, I've made no secret from the start that Elaine is safe and cared for. And Lucian's response is, and I'm just supposed to believe you? And she says, yes, you are. Because if I believed for one moment that my sisters were in danger, no High Lord or King would have kept me from going to save them. Which is what she has done all of her life. The whole time that Lucian has known her, she has always protected and done everything that she can for the people that she cares about. So how would you not see that through all of the first couple chapters where she's in the spring court? How would you not see everything she's gone through for the people that she cares about, including Tamlin, and not realize that there's something else going on? Because from what we can tell, she has zero concern with her sisters. She never talks about it with Tamlin or Lucian or Ianthe. She never tries to push for them to go find out what's happening with them. I guess just the hints that are out there that they just refuse to see are immense in regards to the the first 8 chapters of this book, because they definitely should have seen there was more going on. Lucian does ask if Feyre planned on sparing him and if it was because of genuine friendship or simply for a fear of what it might do to Elaine if something happened to him as her mate. Feyre does not respond. All she ends up saying was, "You would have been fine." So her plans for destruction of the Spring Court didn't necessarily involve hurting him, but they didn't involve saving him either, and it just so happened that he needed saving from Ianthe as she was leaving, and therefore she did end up saving him. That's the only thing that changed in her plans. He does ask if she had planned to kill Tamlin before she left. She says, "I debated it, but I think letting his court collapse around him is a better punishment, and it'll certainly be a longer punishment than an easy death." And she says, "You're his emissary. Surely you realize that slitting his throat, however satisfying, wouldn't win us any allies in this war." So she knows that her vengeance is not worth the possibility of losing this war. Lucian is about to ask more questions because he wants more answers, and Feyre cuts him off. "I'm tired. Our voices echo. Let's talk what's not going to get us caught and killed." The only other thing that Lucian says is, "My father will hunt you for taking his power if he finds out, and kill you for learning how to wield it." Feyre's response is, "He can get in line." Because at this point, that would be the third High Lord who wants to kill her. Because not that Tamlin wants to kill her, but he's definitely very upset with her. Tarquin, although he wants to be friends with her, now wants to kill her. And now we have Baron, who most likely wants to kill her as well. She doesn't really sleep that first night in the cave because she's not sure what Lucian will do. And from the sounds of it, he doesn't really sleep much either. The next morning, they do decide that until the Faebane is out of their systems, they're going to have to keep walking or running. Lucian kind of lays out some different options when it comes to traveling through the Autumn Court. And her response is, "We have to head north, and we have to head north as quickly as possible in the most direct route." She doesn't want to go east towards the Summer Court because they'll kill her on sight, and she doesn't want to go west because it takes them too far out of the way. So she wants to go straight north. But I love how she describes walking through the forest of Autumn Court. We're not going to go into a whole lot of detail on what the autumn and winter courts look like, other than the Autumn Court she describes as striding through a jewel box with all of the colors, because it is the colorful time of autumn. Lucian does describe a little bit of the house. It sounds very Lord of the Rings type, which of course I would absolutely love. And then the Winter Court Castle, Rhys has previously described it to Feyre as being made out of ice and mountain because it's always cold there. But they end up trekking through the Autumn Court for at least 5 days, not really talking because both of them are monitoring the trees, trying to listen out for sentries. Lucian starts telling her that they're going to be coming out of the trees soon into the farmland. And they do talk a little bit. We get a little bit more information on Lucian and what happened with him and his lover. As they come up to the farmlands, they're going to have to still remain unseen because his father does not pay very well for the crops, and the land workers will earn extra coin any way that they can, including and especially by selling out Lucian, the High Lord's son. And the reason this is because with him being the youngest of 7 sons, there was no way he was ever going to end up being High Lord, so his father just didn't really care about what he did as he was growing up. So he was able to train and learn more in whatever areas he chose. And he did part of that by working with the people of the land. And so he got really close to the farmers, and that's how he met Jasminda, is her name. That's where they fell in love. And the farmers don't like him because they see him as the one who led Jasmine to being killed, and that he didn't try and stop his father or brothers from killing her. So that's why they hate him. Feyre does ask if he would ever want his father's crown. And he says, no one's ever asked me that. But even if they had, I would say no, because the amount of bloodshed that it would require to take out all of his brothers. He doesn't have 7 anymore because I think at least 2 of them are dead, but that still means he's got, 4 left. Even if he were to kill all of his brothers to get that power, he says, "I will be ruling over a festering court, only to rule over a crafty, two-faced people." And Feyre's response is, "So the Lord of Foxes," which the fox mask is the mask that Lucian was wearing during the first or most of book 1. They do end up going even further. I mean, it is probably a solid week that they're out there trekking through the autumn court. They do end up going up some boulders because they're getting closer to the winter court, and there is a large like mountain range that separates the autumn court and the winter court. So they're trudging up the mountains, and Feyre isn't winded as much as Lucian is. So Lucian turns to her and says, "How are you not winded?" And she says, "Well, I trained." And he says, "Well, I gathered that much after you took on Dagden and walked away from it." And Feyre's like, "Oh, well, I had the element of surprise with him." And Lucian says, "No, no, you didn't. That was all you, all of your training." He says, "You had my back with them, with Ianthe." And he actually thanks her, which I'm like, finally, thanking her for saving you from something you probably would not have enjoyed. That night, they do sleep in another little cave. This time she actually slips into Lucian's mind while she's dreaming, which I think is interesting that she's doing it while she can't control it. And we are now starting to see her powers coming back at least a little bit. So in her dreams, I think I swam through Lucian's mind as if some small ember of my power was at last returning. And so she dreams about seeing the cave around her, and through Lucian's eyes, she sees herself and notices how human she looks while she sleeps. So it's almost like there's still a little part of her that is human, like her heart. Because I always talk about Feyre and her human heart, and it shows a little bit while she's sleeping. And she also notices that Lucian had removed his own cloak and lays it on her. How unfortunately they do wake up with his brothers, all three of them in the cave with them. One of them yanks her face up, and that's how she wakes up. So super rude way to wake up. But it is his brothers, Eris and two other brothers. They talk about their father being upset that they didn't stop and say hello. Lucian automatically goes into emissary mode and says, "Well, we're on an errand and we can't be delayed." Eris says, "Right, but rumor has it that the two of you have run off together and shunned Tamlin." So the brothers make some crude jokes in regards to that. And this is when Lucian says Eris, and Feyre actually gets to see who Eris is because at that point they hadn't really been formally introduced. And now that she knows a little bit about Mor's history, she can put a face to the name of all the cruelty that she's heard of him in the past. Both of them have gotten a little bit of their magic back. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. If it had been a couple more days, probably would have been able to just smite all three of the brothers without issue. But they don't have enough power back. She is able to get out of Eris's grip. She throws fire up at the other brothers, and Lucian's able to get out of their grip as well. And so as she's holding up like a wall of flame, Lucian then takes his power to smack the ceiling of the cave, and eventually they end up bringing the ceiling down on top of his brothers. It's not going to hold them for forever, but it gives them a chance to get out and start running for the winter court. As they get into the winter court, Feyre does mention that if she had still been human, she would be dead. It was that cold. That it was a bone deep cold, the screaming wind lashing like it was burning whips, which sounds absolutely horrendous to me. Like, give me summer court all day long. They go back and forth with whether or not they should stop for the night. They try to keep going. They do end up stopping in a cave, but there isn't anything dry wood related that they're able to make a fire. But thankfully, enough of their power has rekindled in them that that fire from within is able to help keep both of them at least semi-warm on the inside, not on the outside. But while they're in this cave, they are kind of huddled together because when they left Eris and his brothers, they couldn't take any of their packs with them. So she still has Lucian's cloak, but her cloak was on the ground. So they only have one cloak. So they're huddled together. And Lucian asks for her to tell him about Elaine because he wants a little bit of information. Sounds like a safe topic for them. Not to get in all the other crap. So Feyre tells him she loves her garden and goes into detail on what she did before they had money and after they had money. But she does tell Lucian that Elaine is engaged to a human lord's son, and the lord hates fairies. So Lucian has essentially found himself in Rhysand's shoes when it comes to his mate, because his mate is in love with and engaged to another man. The exact same scenario. Lucian's response is, "I just want to see her just once, just to know." And Feyre says, "To know what?" And he says, "If she is worth fighting for." And Feyre can't bring herself to say that yes, she was most definitely worth fighting for, because she doesn't want to give Lucian the hope that she might say yes to his advances or might eventually come around, because only Elaine is able to say yes or no to whether she comes around in the future. And then Lucian wants to know when she knew that Rhys was her mate, and he wants her to tell him when you stopped loving Tamlin and started loving him instead. Was it before you even left? And she's not quite sure what to say. She's not sure she wants to actually say anything because she's not ready to divulge all of that, but she does say, I never touched Rhysand like that until months later. And Lucian says, well, you kissed under the mountain. And Feyre says, I had as little choice in that as I did the dancing. And Lucian says, and yet this is the male you love. Because Lucian doesn't know anything about Valaris or anything about the things that Rhysand has worked very hard to protect. And Feyre's response is, like we just said, one would think, Lucian, that you'd be glad I fell in love with my mate, given that you're in the same position Rhysand was 6 months ago. And then Lucian says, you left us, not just Tamlin, but us. And she responds with, I told you that day in the woods, you abandoned me long before I ever physically left. You fit into the spring court as little as I did. You enjoyed its pleasures and diversions, but don't pretend you weren't made for something more than that, which I think goes to show that maybe they're not quite friends, but that Feyre saw something in him that he could be more than what he had become in his father's court and more than what he was in Tamlin's court, that he had been made for something more than that, just like her and just like everybody in the Court of Dreams in the Night Court. And Lucian's response is, and where do you think I fit in at the Night Court? And she doesn't say anything because she doesn't have an answer. She thinks, well, as the High Lady of the Night Court, I could offer him a position. And she thinks, well, if we survive long enough to make it home, maybe I will. She says, I do it mostly to keep Elaine from ever going to the Spring Court, but I had little doubt Lucian would be able to hold his own against my friends, and some small horrible part of me enjoyed the thought of taking one more thing from Tamlin. Something vital, something essential. So she's kind of weighing the positives and the negatives to offering Lucian a spot in the Night Court, but I think in the end she's going to end up doing it anyway. Not just to hurt Tamlin. It's not all out of her selfish desires, but I think it's because he's going to fit in a lot better with them once they get past all of the past hate. So they do make it through that night, and thankfully enough power has awoken in her veins to get them a small fire, but not much. So they do make it into the Winter Court, and she assumes that Aerys and his brothers will not try and attack them here, which is wrong, but it's, a nice assumption. Wishful thinking. It is a giant lake covered in ice that they have to get across to continue moving north. So they do start to move out into it, but it's so large and it's so hard to see the other end of it because it is that big. And then they do turn back to look at the edge at one point, and Aerys and his brothers are there. And Aerys puts his hand on the ice with flame coming out of it because he is going to attempt to drown them, or at least dump them into the lake. They start running, just continue running across this vast ice-covered lake. Lucian tells her, don't look back, keep running, run faster. And then they start to hear arrows coming. So he has her zigzag back and forth and keep running faster so that the arrows don't hit them. Aerys is essentially attempting to melt the ice in a straight line with his powers so that they don't actually have to go out on the ice, because he's trying to melt it enough that Feyre and Lucian fall under. And then he wants the ice to reform over them. So that's why they're trying to run in zigzags, also to avoid the arrows coming at them. And then Feyre realizes that she has enough magic. She is able to at least fight back a little bit. So then she uses her own ice to shoot out from her palms onto the ice at their feet to stop it from melting in front of them. An arrow that slices through her ear and slices part of her cheek, and then one that goes clear through her arm and is actually sticking through her forearm. So she does end up stopping. Obviously, she has to pull that arrow out. She snaps it in two, rips it out, and then Aerys winnows to them, and he says it can end with you going under, begging me to let you out after the ice refreezes instantly after you, or you can end this by agreeing to take my hand, but either way you're coming with me. She does end up trying to fight Eris back, but he winnows right in front of her with a backhanded blow to her face. He does get her to the point where she's on the ground and he's kind of dragging her by her hair. There is a fire gag in her mouth and fire like cuffs around her arms and feet. And at this point, she has a panic moment, which we saw her have in book 2 a couple of times. She has it again now, which is not something she's had a lot, but it's just like everything is happening all at once. She's feeling a little bit overwhelmed. So she does have a little panic moment where she can't remember what to do, how to move, how to stop what's happening. Thankfully, she doesn't have to because a shadow slammed into the earth before us, cracking the ice towards every horizon. Not a shadow, an Illyrian warrior. Superhero landing. I love it. It's just like so much happening to Feyre, and you're like, you could do it, you could do it, just do something. And then all of a sudden Cassian lands, and you're like, yes, screaming happily in your head. So it is Cassian. He has all 7 of his red siphons out over his scaled black armor. Wings are tucked in, snarling at Eris with 5 centuries worth of rage, which I love. Not dead, not hurt, but whole, his wings repaired and strong. Another impact struck the ice behind us. Shadows skittered in its wake. So this is Azriel, who has also superhero landed on the ice. She begins crying in earnest because if you think about it, she has gone at least a week, possibly a week and a half, where she's barely sleeping. She doesn't have her magic, so she's trying to stay awake as much as possible. They've been traveling nonstop. She is mentally and physically exhausted, and because of everything she had to do in the spring court on top of that, and she hasn't seen Rhysand in at least a month, so she's struggling hardcore, which is understandable. So I began crying in earnest. Some leash I'd kept on myself snapping free as my friends landed, as I saw Azriel too was alive and healed. Cassian then says to Eris, I suggest you drop my lady. Eris's grip only tightens, and the wrath that twisted Cassian's face was world-ending. But his hazel eyes slid to mine, a silent command, because Cassian is the one who has spent months upon months training Feyre, not just training her to attack, but also to defend, almost as if he knew some scenario similar to this was going to happen, which with everything that they have going on, it's kind of a given that something like this was going to happen. So she is able to actually spin around on the ice and slam her bound legs up into Eris between his legs, very painfully. So he lurches, bending over, right into the fist where she brings up her bound hands and is able to punch him in the nose and actually crunch his bones. And then she scrambles away and Cassian steps right in. So Cassian and Eris battle for a little bit. She realizes that Azriel is battling with the other 2 brothers. There are sentries on the edge of the ice lake that are unleashing arrows, both wood and magic. Thankfully, they are bouncing off of a blue shield. This is Azriel's shield who's protecting them. And Feyre is kind of standing back watching her friends fight with Lucian's brothers. And she thinks, for a heartbeat, I saw how it would play out. 3 of Baron's sons dead at our hands, a temporary satisfaction for me, 5 centuries of satisfaction for Cassian, Azriel, and more. But if Baron still debated what side to support in the war, killing 3 more of his sons probably isn't the way to win him over. So all she says is stop. And immediately Azriel and Cassian obey. They stop immediately. She doesn't say it loudly. It's a soft, cold command. And they stop and then start walking towards her, flank her on either side. Eris is glaring at them, sneering a little bit. Then she says, you all deserve to die for this and for much, much more, but I'm going to spare your miserable lives. And at that point, she removes the glamour that she has had on her right arm, which is where she has the mating bond inked and her acceptance of being High Lady of the Night Court. Smooth skin that now became adorned with swirls and whirls of ink, the markings of my new title and my mating bond. Lucian's face drained of color as he strode for us. He stops a healthy distance away. She says, I am High Lady of the Night Court. And immediately Eris stops sneering. His ember eyes widen, something like fear now creeping in, because he realized he came really close to hurting the High Lady of the Night Court, the mate of the most powerful High Lord in all of Prythian, because he's like, crap. One of Lucian's brothers says there is no such thing as a high lady, and all she says is there is now. And she finds Cassian's gaze, and there is nothing but pride and relief glimmering there. So she says, take me home, take us both home. And then she turns to the Autumn Court people and says, we'll see you on the battlefield. And she thinks, let them decide whether it's on our side or Hybern's side, which side they'll be. Cassian does pick her up and flies away, as picks up Lucian. And I love that Cassian says to Feyre, I don't know who looks more uncomfortable, Az or Lucian. And we do actually get Lucian's last name here, which is Van Sarah. So we get very few last names in all of this series. We get the Archeron sisters. We get Lucian's last name. We still don't know if Rhys, Moore, Azriel, Cassian, we don't know if any of them have last names, or even Amryn. Tamlin doesn't even have a last name that we know of, but we do get Lucian's last name. We're going to find out in a couple chapters that he doesn't use his last name, just like Feyre didn't use her last name for a while she was fighting for their lives. They end up at the border of the Winter Court and the territory in the middle between the seasonal and the solar court. So under the mountain and the sacred wood separates the seasonal and the solar court. Moore is waiting on the Winter Court border. We find out that because of their tenuous ties with Winter Court, that they didn't want the Winter Court sentries looking for Feyre and wherever Cassie and Azriel ended up finding her. So Moore is on that court border, trying to get them to focus on her instead. But it's also because she isn't ready to see Eris yet, which is perfectly understandable. And Moore kind of tries to say sorry for it, and Feyre's like, nope, you don't need to apologize. It's perfectly fine. I completely understand why you wouldn't want to be the one who came. They do discuss that Lucian did fight against his brothers with them. And so that's kind of enough to let Moore say, okay, fine, you can come back with us. I'll agree. And I love that Feyre says, I almost pitied Lucian when Moore looked at him, the weight in her gaze, the utter judgment, the stare of the Morrigan whose gift was pure truth. And so Moore says, okay, we're going back to the townhouse because someone is there waiting for you. So that's where Rhysand now is. And that is it for this set of chapters. So much happened in those chapters. We are officially out of the Spring Court. We have left all them crazy people behind, and we are back to the Night Court that we love so much, and headed back to Velaris.
Loved the moment when Moore and Feyre see each other, go running or haven't seen each other in a while and just need your friend, just that hug. I was in tears at that moment again, too. Totally one of those moments.
I agree, and
I
I'm so
love how they are
glad.
together.
Yes, I'm so glad Feyre has found that, because I think she wanted that with Ianthe, and that's not the type of person Ianthe is. She didn't care about being friends. She was just there to exploit Feyre in whatever way she could or control her. But with Moore, it's an actual friendship. And this is really the first female friendship that Feyre has had, because she doesn't have this type of relationship with her sisters. So I do love that she has gotten to this point with Moore, and that they continue to grow their friendship over the rest of this book. Anything else that we want to chat about in this set of chapters?
I mean, we could always talk about how adorable Cassian is with his world-ending anger, his pride in his High Lady. Them two, their relationship together is what you wanted Lucian and her friendship to be through the
Right?
first book into the second. I love when she's back with her court. It's too perfect.
I just love all of their relationships and how easily Feyre fits into them, because it's just another piece of the puzzle with her. And I love that. I love that they all have their own personalities and their own backgrounds and stories and their own things, their preferences and loves, but they're all a family and they act like family and friends. There is still a little bit of a rank to them and their decisions, but they don't hold to it when it's just them. They only hold to that when it's other people, when there are outside people there. And I just feel like they all fit in so well together.
Now we're home. We made it back. We get to see what happens with Lucian and Elaine. Stay tuned for the next episode. And if you haven't read it yet, don't forget, just read it. See you guys next time.